You need a lesson in respect, Mother. Nathan Sinclair's voice cut through the patter of rain on the Mercedes windshield, cold and unfamiliar to Miranda's ears. At 65, she had weathered many storms, but the transformation of her once loving son into this stranger behind the wheel terrified her more than any physical danger ever had. They had just visited Robert's grave, a tradition on the anniversary of his death 3 years ago. What should have been a moment of shared remembrance had devolved into another argument about the company, with Nathan dismissing her concerns about recent financial decisions at Sinclair Motors. "Pull over, Nathan," Miranda said, keeping her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Let's discuss this rationally when we're both calmer." "There's nothing to discuss." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You've been undermining me at every board meeting, questioning decisions you don't understand. The company has moved beyond your outdated ideas." In the passenger seat beside Nathan, Victor Reed, his new CFO and constant shadow, maintained a practiced neutral expression, though Miranda caught the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. She disliked Victor from their first meeting, sensing something predatory beneath his polished credentials and carefully curated charm. The car suddenly swerved onto the shoulder of the rural highway, tires splashing through puddles formed by the unrelenting downpour. They were at least 80 kilometers from home, surrounded by nothing but dripping forest and gray skies. "Get out." Nathan didn't look at her as he unlocked the doors. "What?" Miranda stared at her son in disbelief. "Nathan, it's pouring, and we're miles from anywhere. Perhaps some time to reflect on your position will help you understand things more clearly." His voice had taken on the patronizing tone he'd developed recently, the one that made her feel like a confused elderly woman rather than the co-founder of a multi-million-dollar automotive empire. Victor finally spoke, his voice smooth as silk. "Nathan, perhaps this is—" "No," Nathan cut him off. "She needs to understand that she can't control everything anymore." He turned to Miranda, eyes hard. "Out. Now." Miranda recognized that further argument would only escalate the situation. With dignity that belied her churning emotions, she gathered her purse and opened the door. The rain immediately soaked through her light jacket as she stepped onto the muddy shoulder. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. Nathan's response was to accelerate away, the Mercedes spraying dirty water onto her already soaked clothes. Miranda watched the taillights disappear around a curve, standing perfectly still despite the rain streaming down her face. For 3 years since Robert's death, she had watched her son change under Victor's influence. She had retreated, giving Nathan space to establish himself as CEO, ignoring the red flags that multiplied with each passing month. She had told herself it was grief, adjustment, the burden of responsibility, anything but the truth she now had to face. Her son had become someone she no longer recognized. The road stretched empty in both directions, cell reception non-existent in this remote area. Miranda took shelter under a large pine tree, marginally drier than the exposed roadside. She wasn't afraid, not of the isolation or the weather. What frightened her was the realization that her son could abandon his own mother on a deserted road without hesitation. 10 minutes passed, rain drumming steadily on the forest canopy. Then the distinctive sound of an approaching vehicle broke through the monotony. Not the sleek purr of Nathan's Mercedes, but the deeper rumble of a larger engine. A black pickup truck slowed beside her, its wipers battling the deluge. The passenger window lowered, revealing a weathered face Miranda hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. "Need a ride, Mrs. Sinclair?" James Reeves asked, as casually as if they'd arranged to meet here. Relief washed over Miranda, quickly replaced by sharp suspicion. "James? What are you doing here?" The former military man, once Robert's most trusted colleague in their special operations days, later head of security for Sinclair Motors, offered a slight smile. "Let's get you out of this rain first. Explanations can wait." Miranda climbed into the warm cab, accepting the towel he offered. "This isn't a coincidence." "No, ma'am." James kept his eyes on the road as he pulled back onto the highway. "Robert asked me to keep an eye on you. Said there might come a day when you'd need backup." "Robert's been gone 3 years," Miranda said, studying the man's profile. "You've been watching me all this time?" "Not constantly." James navigated the wet road with practiced ease. "But I've been monitoring the situation at Sinclair Motors. Your son's new friend has quite the interesting background, one he's gone to great lengths to obscure." Miranda felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. Tell me everything. Robert suspected something was wrong with Nathan's finances before he died, asked me to investigate quietly. James reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small USB drive. Everything's here. Nathan's gambling debts, failed investments, the money he's been borrowing from increasingly dangerous people. Victor's pattern of targeting vulnerable executives and taking over their companies. Robert was collecting evidence when his heart gave out. "Why didn't he tell me?" Miranda whispered, clutching the small device. "He planned to, once he had all the facts. He didn't want to worry you with suspicions." James glanced at her. "Before he died, he made me promise to watch over you, to be ready when you needed me." Miranda stared out at the rain-lashed landscape, feeling something shift inside her. A hardening, a resolve crystallizing after years of compromise and retreat. "Nathan thinks he taught me a lesson today," she said finally, her voice taking on an edge James hadn't heard since their military days. "But he's the one who's about to learn something." James nodded, a slight smile forming. "What's our next move?" "Take me home," Miranda said, straightening in her seat. "I need to change into dry clothes. Then we're going to visit Robert's old study. There are documents there, contingencies he put in place that Nathan knows nothing about." As the truck continued through the storm, Miranda felt an almost forgotten sensation, the calm, focused clarity that preceded action. Nathan's cruel abandonment wasn't just a betrayal. It was his last mistake. The son who left her in the rain had no idea who his mother really was or what she was capable of, and it was finally time to remind him. Robert Sinclair's private study remained exactly as he had left it 3 years ago. Miranda had refused to let anyone alter it, preserving his sanctuary as a silent memorial. Now, as she entered the wood-paneled room with James following respectfully behind, the space took on a different significance, no longer just a shrine to memory, but an arsenal for the battle ahead. Robert kept everything meticulously organized, Miranda said, moving to the large mahogany desk that dominated the room. Her still damp hair was now pulled back in a practical ponytail, business attire replacing her soaked clothes. His public files were impeccable, but the real records were always hidden. James watched as Miranda knelt by the antique globe in the corner, rotating it to reveal a small keypad. "Military habits die hard," he observed. Indeed. Miranda entered a 6-digit code, their wedding anniversary followed by the coordinates where they had first met during a classified operation. The globe's base slid open, revealing a hidden compartment containing a leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope with her name in Robert's distinctive handwriting. She removed both items, placing them reverently on the desk. Robert always had contingency plans. It was how he survived 30 years in special operations before we retired to build Sinclair Motors. "He never truly retired from strategic thinking," James said. "Even as a businessman, he operated like we were still in the field, identifying threats, securing assets, planning for worst-case scenarios." Miranda opened the ledger first, revealing pages of Robert's precise handwriting. Observations about Nathan's behavior dating back 5 years, detailed notes on suspicious financial transactions, and profiles of individuals who had entered Nathan's orbit. Victor Reed featured most prominently. "He knew," Miranda whispered, scanning the pages. "He saw Nathan changing before I did." "Robert noticed patterns others missed," James confirmed. "About 6 months before he died, he asked me to quietly investigate Nathan's finances. What I found disturbed us both. Your son had accumulated massive gambling debts, high-stakes poker games, sports betting, risky market speculation. He'd lost millions, borrowing from increasingly questionable sources to cover his tracks." Miranda continued turning pages, her expression growing grimmer. "And Victor? How does he fit into this?" Victor Reed specializes in identifying wealthy businesses with vulnerable leadership. He appeared in Nathan's life right when the debts became unmanageable, positioning himself as a financial savior. James stepped closer, pointing to a particular entry. Robert tracked Victor's previous partnerships. "Oh, the pattern is consistent. He finds desperate executives, offers solutions that gradually transfer control to him, then discards them once he has what he wants." Miranda sat heavily in Robert's chair, processing this betrayal. Why didn't Robert confront Nathan? His health was already failing, James said gently, and confrontation would have driven Nathan further into Victor's influence. Instead, Robert focused on protecting you and the company's future. Miranda reached for the sealed envelope, breaking Robert's wax seal with steady hands. Inside was a letter and several legal documents. My dearest Miranda, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and circumstances have forced you to seek answers I should have shared while I could. Forgive me for this final secret. I wanted to shield you from worry during whatever time we had left together. Our son is in trouble. The details are in my notes, but the essence is simple. Nathan has developed a gambling addiction that has compromised his judgment and finances. The man calling himself Victor Reed, not his real name, is exploiting this vulnerability to gain control of our company. I've prepared for this contingency. The attached documents include amendments to our corporate structure that I quietly implemented before my health declined. On paper, Nathan appears to have full control as CEO, but the true power remains with you through a series of holding companies and legal structures that only you, as my widow, can activate. James Reeves has been my eyes and ears. Trust him as I have always trusted him, since our days in service together, through the building of our civilian life, and now as your protector in my absence. Nathan may need to fall before he can rise again. This will hurt you, watching our son fail, but sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing consequences to unfold. Be strong, as you have always been. All my love, for all time. Robert Miranda read the letter twice, then carefully examined the legal documents attached. Robert had indeed created an elaborate safety net, a corporate structure that allowed Nathan to believe he held ultimate authority while preserving Miranda's ability to retake control when necessary. Did you know about these arrangements? She asked James. Not the specifics. Robert kept the legal details private, but he made me promise to stay close, to be ready when you needed support. James's weathered face softened with rare emotion. His last words to me, the day before he died, were about you. He said, "When Miranda finally sees what's happening, she'll need allies who remember who she truly is." Miranda stood, straightening to her full height. "And who did Robert think I truly am, James? The woman who out-strategized terrorist cells in 3 countries, the intelligence officer whose operational plans are still taught as case studies." James's voice held quiet respect. "The same woman who seamlessly transformed into a corporate co-founder and then a grieving widow, adaptable as always. Robert never forgot who you were beneath the persona you created for civilian life." Miranda moved to the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds of the estate she and Robert had built together. Rain still fell, gentler now, beating on glass that reflected her determined expression. "Nathan believes I'm just a relic, an old woman clinging to outdated notions, an obstacle to his vision." She turned back to James. "Victor sees me as an inconvenience to be managed. Neither understands what they're dealing with." "What's our first move?" James asked, falling naturally into the role of trusted lieutenant. Miranda returned to the desk, spreading out Robert's documents. "First, we verify everything. I need complete financial transparency. All of Nathan's hidden debts, every transaction Victor has influenced, every asset they've leveraged without proper authorization." "I can access those records," James confirmed. "My security clearances at Sinclair were never formally revoked after I retired." "Second, we identify our allies within the company. There must be executives and board members who've noticed the irregularities but have been afraid to speak up. Margaret Chen in accounting has been quietly documenting discrepancies," James offered, "and William Foster on the board has been asking pointed questions about recent acquisitions." Miranda nodded. "Perfect starting points. Third, we need to understand exactly what Victor's endgame is. He's not dismantling the company, he wants to control it. But for what purpose? Based on his pattern at other companies, he positions himself to extract maximum value through a series of transactions that appear legitimate on the surface. By the time the manipulation becomes evident, he's moved on, leaving devastation in his wake. Miranda's expression hardened. "Not this time. Robert built Sinclair Motors with integrity at its foundation. I won't watch it become another corporate carcass picked clean by vultures." She gathered the documents carefully, securing them in the hidden safe. "Nathan abandoned me today thinking he was teaching me humility. Instead, he's awakened something he doesn't understand." "What do you need from me?" James asked. "Exactly what Robert asked of you. Be my eyes and ears, my right hand." Miranda's gaze was steady, the last traces of the hurt, confused mother replaced by calculated determination. "Nathan sees me as weak, Victor sees me as irrelevant. Let them maintain those illusions while we prepare. As they left the study, Miranda paused at the door, glancing back at Robert's chair. The empty space that had represented only loss for 3 years now transformed into a source of renewed purpose. Robert knew this day might come, she said softly. He prepared for it, even from beyond the grave. He always said you were the strategist between you, James replied. He just laid the groundwork. The campaign ahead is yours to lead. Miranda nodded once, decisive. Then let's begin. Outside, the storm was finally passing, sheets of rain giving way to scattered drops. Like the weather, Miranda's period of passive grief had come to an end. The clouds were breaking, and what emerged would be neither gentle nor forgiving. Dawn broke over the Sinclair estate, painting the manicured grounds in soft golden light that belied the storm of the previous day. Miranda sat in her sunroom, a spread of financial documents before her, a forgotten cup of tea gone cold at her elbow. She had been reviewing records since 5 a.m., piecing together the puzzle Robert had started before his death. "The pattern is worse than we thought," she said as James entered with fresh coffee. Despite the early hour, he looked alert and prepared, his military precision evident in every movement. "Nathan has leveraged nearly 40% of his company shares against personal loans." James placed the coffee beside her. "The lenders? Some legitimate banks initially, but as his needs grew, he turned to less reputable sources." Miranda indicated several highlighted transactions. "These two entities, Meridian Holdings and Phoenix Capital, they don't exist beyond shell corporations. Any idea who's really behind them?" "Victor Reed, through various proxies," James confirmed, handing her a slim folder. "I spent the night tracing the ownership structures. He's created an elaborate web, but the connections are there if you know where to look." Miranda scanned the documents, her expression hardening. "So Victor loaned my son money through these shells, knowing Nathan couldn't repay. The collateral being his voting shares in Sinclair Motors." "Exactly. When Nathan inevitably defaults, control transfers to Victor without any visible takeover that might alert the board or regulators." James indicated a date on the calendar. "Based on the terms, the first major loan comes due next month. Nathan doesn't have the liquidity to cover it." Miranda leaned back, processing this information. "This explains Nathan's recent behavior, the desperation, the hostility toward any questioning of his decisions. He's trapped, and Victor has positioned himself as Nathan's only ally," James added, "isolating him from anyone who might offer genuine help, including you." "What about the company's finances? Nathan has CEO authority. Has he been siphoning corporate funds to cover his personal debts?" James's expression confirmed her fears before he spoke. "Not directly, that would be too obvious. But he's approved several questionable acquisitions and consulting contracts that funnel money to Victor's associates. On paper, they appear legitimate, but the services rendered are either grossly overpriced or entirely fictional." Miranda stood, moving to the window that overlooked the circular driveway where Nathan had learned to ride his first bicycle, where he'd proudly displayed his first car, a vintage Mustang Robert had helped him restore. The memory of her beaming, oil-smudged 17-year-old son contrasted painfully with the man who had abandoned her on a rainy roadside. "He's still my son, James," she said quietly. "Despite everything." "I know." James's tone held no judgment. Robert knew too. That's why his contingency plans were designed to protect both the company and Nathan himself, from Victor and from his own worst impulses. Miranda turned back, resolution replacing sentiment. "Then we proceed carefully. Victor is the primary target, but Nathan must face consequences if he's ever to rebuild what he's broken, both in the company and in our family. What's our next step? We need allies within Sinclair Motors, people with access and loyalty." Miranda returned to the table, pulling out an organizational chart. "Margaret Chen in accounting. You mentioned she's noticed discrepancies?" "Yes. She worked with Robert for 15 years. She's been documenting irregularities, but feared raising concerns directly with Nathan. Contact her, discreetly. And William Foster on the board. He was Robert's friend before he was a business associate. Arrange a meeting, somewhere Victor's network won't observe." James nodded. "What about Nathan? He'll notice if you suddenly change your behavior toward him." "I'll maintain the persona he expects, the concerned but ultimately powerless mother." Miranda's smile held no warmth. "Let him believe yesterday's lesson achieved its purpose. The more comfortable Victor and Nathan feel, the more careless they'll become. By mid-morning, Miranda had established her command center in Robert's study. The space that had been preserved as a mausoleum was now alive with purpose, its hidden safe open, secure phones installed, and surveillance equipment monitoring key areas of the estate. James returned from his initial contacts, bearing both confirmation and new concerns. Margaret will meet us tonight. She's bringing financial records she's kept separate from the company's systems. He placed his phone on the desk, displaying a message. Foster can't meet in person yet. He's under too much scrutiny from Nathan and Victor. But he sent this. Miranda read the encrypted message. Board meeting moved up to Friday. Proposal to amend corporate bylaws on voting rights. Urgent intervention needed before then. Friday, Miranda murmured. 3 days to prepare. What amendments are they proposing? Based on Foster's intelligence, they want to dilute the protective provisions Robert put in place regarding family ownership requirements. If passed, these amendments would allow Nathan to transfer controlling interest outside the family without full board approval. Miranda's eyes narrowed. The final step in Victor's plan. Once those protections are removed, Nathan's defaulted loans would trigger an automatic transfer of control to Victor's shell companies. She pulled Robert's original corporate structure documents from the safe. We need to activate the contingency provisions. Robert established a separate class of shares, held in trust and controlled by me as his widow, that supersede all others in matters of company control. Nathan doesn't know these shares exist? No. On paper, he believes he inherited Robert's full ownership position. These shadow shares only activate under specific circumstances, like the ones we're facing now. Miranda indicated the complex legal language. We'll need a securities attorney who can implement this without tipping our hand. Robert had a contact, Elizabeth Winters. She helped structure these provisions originally. She's retired now but still consults occasionally. Contact her immediately. We need her expertise before Friday's meeting. As James made the call, Miranda accessed Nathan's calendar through the executive system her administrator privileges still accessed. What she found confirmed their timeline was even tighter than they realized. Nathan has a meeting with Victor and unknown parties tonight at the Cardinal Club, she reported, referring to an exclusive venue where the city's business elite conducted their most private negotiations. The timing suggests they're finalizing details before Friday's board presentation. James ended his call with positive news. Elizabeth will see us at 2 p.m. today. She remembers Robert's arrangements clearly. Good. Before then, I need to make an appearance at Sinclair headquarters. Nathan will expect me to be either confrontational or submissive after yesterday. I'll give him the latter. Let him believe his lesson worked. Is that wise? Appearing at the office puts you directly in their territory. Miranda's expression shifted to something James hadn't seen since their military days. A calculated acceptance of necessary risk. Sometimes the best reconnaissance happens in plain sight. Nathan will be so pleased with my apparent submission that he won't notice what I'm really observing. She gathered her things with practiced efficiency. While I'm there, I need you to access Nathan's home office. His personal laptop should contain communications with Victor that aren't on company servers. Consider it done, James replied, his own expression matching her operational focus. What about security systems? Nathan never changed the override codes Robert and I established. A hint of sadness colored her voice. Another example of his carelessness. The primary code is still his childhood birthday. As Miranda prepared to leave, she paused at Robert's desk, hand resting briefly on the polished wood. Robert saw this coming. He tried to protect Nathan from himself. And now that task falls to you, James observed quietly. Yes. Her moment of reflection passed, replaced by resolute determination. Nathan abandoned me on that road thinking he was demonstrating his power. Instead, he showed me exactly how far he's fallen and how necessary it is to stop both him and Victor before they destroy everything Robert built. She straightened, every inch the strategist planning her campaign. By Friday, they'll understand what a terrible mistake they've made, not just in their scheme against Sinclair Motors, but in underestimating exactly who they're facing. James nodded, a grim smile touching his weathered face. They have no idea. Sinclair Motors headquarters rose 22 stories above the city's financial district, its glass and steel facade gleaming in the midday sun. Miranda entered through the executive entrance, nodding to security personnel who greeted her with the deference always shown to the founder's widow, despite her diminished role under Nathan's leadership. Mrs. Sinclair, acknowledged the receptionist on the executive floor, surprise evident in her voice. "We weren't expecting you today." "I thought I'd check in with my son," Miranda replied, her voice deliberately softer than usual, her posture slightly hunched, the physical manifestation of the submission Nathan expected after yesterday's lesson. "Mr. Sinclair's in a budget meeting, but I'll let him know you're here." "No need to interrupt him," Miranda demurred. "I'll wait in my old office, if it's still available." The receptionist hesitated. "Your former office has been reassigned, but you're welcome to use the visitor's lounge." "Of course," Miranda smiled, masking the confirmation of another slight. Her office, maintained for years after stepping back from daily operations out of respect for her founder status, had apparently been repurposed, another move to erase her presence. The visitor's lounge offered a strategic advantage, however. It overlooked the main executive corridor, allowing Miranda to observe the flow of personnel while appearing to simply wait patiently. She settled into a comfortable chair, positioning herself with a clear view of Nathan's office and the conference rooms beyond. Within 20 minutes, her patience was rewarded. Nathan emerged from the main boardroom, surrounded by financial executives, Victor at his right hand as always. Her son looked tired, stress evident in the tightness around his eyes, the forced confidence in his stance. For a moment, Miranda saw past the arrogant CEO to the pressured man drowning in consequences of his own making. She waited until he noticed her, carefully arranging her features into an expression of cautious reconciliation. Nathan faltered momentarily upon seeing her, genuine surprise followed by calculated satisfaction crossing his face. He excused himself from his group and approached. "Mother," he greeted, loudly enough for others to hear, "I'm surprised to see you here." "I thought we should talk," Miranda said, her voice appropriately subdued. "Yesterday was difficult for both of us." Nathan's posture relaxed slightly, interpreting her tone as capitulation. "Let's use my office." Victor materialized at Nathan's elbow, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Mrs. Sinclair, what an unexpected pleasure." "Nathan, shall I reschedule your call with the Frankfurt investors?" "No need," Nathan replied. "This won't take long." The dismissive confidence in his tone, the certainty that his mother posed no threat worthy of disrupting his schedule, was exactly what Miranda had anticipated. She followed them into the spacious corner office that had once been Robert's domain, now transformed with modern minimalist decor that erased any trace of the company's founder. "I'll give you privacy," Victor offered smoothly, though Miranda noted he left the connecting door to his adjacent office conspicuously ajar. Nathan settled behind his desk, the position of power. "You've had time to reconsider your approach to company matters?" Miranda clasped her hands in her lap, the picture of a chastened mother. "I realize I've been resistant to changes that perhaps are necessary in today's market. My concerns come from caring about Robert's legacy, but I understand the company must evolve." The tension in Nathan's shoulders eased further. She was playing directly into his expectations. "I'm glad you've come to your senses. Your interference in board matters has been counterproductive." "I only want what's best for Sinclair Motors," Miranda said, allowing a calculated tremble in her voice. "And for you, Nathan, you're still my son." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, perhaps a momentary recognition of the cruelty of his recent actions, or merely satisfaction at her apparent surrender. "The board meeting on Friday will implement important structural changes. I expect your support, not your questioning." "Of course," she nodded, "though I'd appreciate understanding the changes before the meeting, so I'm properly prepared." Nathan hesitated, then reached for a folder on his desk. "We're streamlining the ownership structure to facilitate faster decision-making and strategic partnerships. These amendments remove outdated restrictions that limit our growth potential." Miranda accepted the folder, scanning the documents inside while maintaining her facade of mild confusion. The amendments were exactly as James had reported, designed to remove the family ownership requirements that prevented Nathan from transferring controlling interests to outside entities. "This seems very technical," she said, playing her role. "I trust you've had proper legal review?" "The best," Nathan replied dismissively. "Victor has assembled a top-tier legal team to ensure everything is properly structured." Miranda noted the phrasing. Victor's team, not Sinclair's long-standing corporate counsel. Another red flag. "I see," she said, returning the folder. "Well, I won't take more of your time. I know how busy you are leading the company." Nathan studied her, satisfaction evident in his expression. I'm glad we've reached an understanding, Mother. Yesterday's incident was unfortunate, but perhaps necessary to clarify our positions. Yes, Miranda agreed softly. It clarified many things for me. As she rose to leave, she deliberately left her scarf on the chair, a small, innocuous item that would provide a reason to return. Will you be home for dinner tonight? Perhaps we could continue rebuilding our relationship. I have a business dinner at the Cardinal Club, Nathan replied. Tomorrow, perhaps. The Cardinal Club? That's quite exclusive. She kept her tone conversational. Important clients? Strategic partners, he answered vaguely. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. Miranda nodded, accepting the dismissal. Of course. Another time then. As she exited through the executive area, she noted which offices showed activity, which employees watched her passage with sympathy or curiosity. The company culture had shifted under Nathan's leadership, tension evident in hunched shoulders and whispered conversations that stopped when executives passed. Outside, in the privacy of her car, Miranda immediately called James. The meeting at the Cardinal Club is confirmed for tonight. They're finalizing the legal strategy for Friday's board meeting. Understood, James replied. I've completed my search of Nathan's home office. You were right. His personal laptop contained extensive communications with Victor dating back 18 months. I've copied everything to secure storage. What about the external partnerships? Any indication of who's behind the shell companies? Still tracing that, but I found something else concerning. There are references to finalizing arrangements with overseas investors after Friday's amendments pass. The communication suggests these investors require anonymity and are willing to pay substantially above market value for their position. Miranda processed this new information. Money laundering, perhaps? Or something else entirely? Unknown. But Nathan appears desperate to complete the deal. His personal accounts show he's nearly insolvent, despite his CEO salary. The gambling debts are even worse than we initially thought. And Victor stands to receive a substantial finder's fee when the deal closes, I imagine, Miranda concluded. What about our meeting with Elizabeth Winters? Scheduled for 2 p.m. as planned. I've briefed her on the situation. Good. And Margaret Chen? Meeting us at Elizabeth's office. She's bringing financial records that should confirm the pattern of suspicious transactions. Miranda checked her watch. I'll meet you at Elizabeth's. In the meantime, see what you can find about tonight's meeting at the Cardinal Club. Who's attending? What room they've booked? Already on it, James confirmed. One more thing. I've activated surveillance on Victor's known residences and movements. He made an interesting call immediately after you left Nathan's office. To whom? Unknown number, but he reported that you appeared subdued and no longer a concern. He specifically said, she's broken. Proceed as planned. A cold smile touched Miranda's lips. Perfect. Let them believe I'm neutralized. It's exactly the cover we need for what comes next. As she drove toward her meeting with Elizabeth Winters, Miranda reflected on what she'd observed at headquarters. Nathan was under far more pressure than he revealed. Victor was controlling access to information and people, and the company Robert had built with such integrity was being systematically prepared for exploitation. You were right to be concerned, Robert, she murmured to herself, but you were also right to prepare. They've made their moves. Now, I'll make mine. Elizabeth Winters' office occupied the top floor of a discreet building in the old financial district, far from the glass towers that now dominated the city skyline. At 72, she had officially retired from her position as one of the country's preeminent corporate attorneys, but maintained a small practice serving long-standing clients, particularly those with complex situations requiring absolute discretion. Miranda, Elizabeth greeted warmly, embracing her with genuine affection. It's been too long. I've missed our conversations. Elizabeth, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. The attorney gestured them into her private conference room, where Margaret Chen already waited, a stack of files organized neatly before her. The accountant rose nervously as they entered, her usually composed demeanor betraying anxiety. Mrs. Sinclair, Margaret began, I've been documenting financial irregularities for months, but I didn't know who to trust. When Mr. Reeves contacted me, You did exactly right, Miranda reassured her, taking a seat at the table. Robert always said you were the most meticulous accountant he'd ever worked with. That's why he positioned you where you could monitor the company's financial health. Margaret's expression reflected surprise. He did that intentionally? Robert saw further ahead than most people realized, James explained, closing the door and engaging the privacy lock. He placed trusted individuals throughout the company structure as a safeguard. Elizabeth cleared her throat. Let's address the immediate situation. James has briefed me on the proposed bylaw amendments and Friday's board meeting. Based on what I've reviewed, Victor Reed has orchestrated a sophisticated hostile takeover using Nathan as his unwitting facilitator. Not entirely unwitting, Miranda corrected gently. Nathan's poor choices created his vulnerability, but he's actively participating in dismantling the protections Robert established. Indeed, Elizabeth agreed, reaching for a leather portfolio embossed with the Winters and Associates logo. Fortunately, Robert anticipated this possibility. The contingency provisions we created together are still legally binding and take precedence over any amendments Nathan might push through. She spread several documents across the table, pointing to key sections. Robert established a dual-class share structure when he reorganized the company after his diagnosis. The public-facing shares, the ones Nathan believes constitute controlling interest, are actually subordinate to these Class B shares held in trust. Margaret leaned forward, examining the documents with professional interest. These shares don't appear on any financial statements I've seen. They wouldn't, Elizabeth confirmed. They exist in a separate legal structure, triggered only under specific conditions, like the ones we're facing now. Miranda, as trustee, can activate these shares when necessary to protect the company from exactly this type of situation. Miranda studied the legal framework Robert had created. And this activation, how do we implement it? I've prepared the necessary filings, Elizabeth replied, producing another folder. Once executed, these documents establish your controlling interest effective immediately. However, strategic timing is crucial. If Nathan becomes aware of these shares before the board meeting, he might attempt legal maneuvers to challenge their validity. We need the element of surprise, James observed. Precisely. Elizabeth turned to Margaret. That's where your financial documentation becomes vital. By presenting evidence of fiduciary malfeasance alongside Miranda's assertion of controlling interest, we create an airtight case for her intervention. Margaret nodded, opening her files. I've tracked 3 distinct patterns of financial irregularity. First, the series of acquisitions of underperforming dealerships at inflated prices, all owned by shell companies that trace back to Victor Reed's associates. Second, consulting contracts for services never actually rendered. Third, the systematic overvaluation of certain inventory categories to artificially inflate quarterly results. She pushed forward a USB drive. Everything is documented here. Transaction records, market comparisons proving the inflated valuations, and evidence that Nathan personally approved each irregularity despite warnings from the finance department. Miranda accepted the drive, her expression grave. This goes beyond poor management into potential securities fraud. Yes, Margaret confirmed quietly, which is why I've been so concerned. These actions put the entire company at risk, not just financially, but legally. Elizabeth interlaced her fingers, her experienced gaze evaluating the situation. Based on this evidence, we have multiple options. The most direct approach would be for Miranda to activate her controlling shares immediately and remove Nathan as CEO before Friday's meeting. No, Miranda said firmly. That approach addresses the symptom, not the disease. Victor would simply retreat and find another vulnerable company to target. And Nathan would never understand the full consequences of his actions. What do you propose instead? Elizabeth asked. A more comprehensive strategy. Miranda stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city where Sinclair Motors had grown from a single dealership to an automotive empire. We allow Friday's meeting to proceed as planned, with certain modifications. James recognized the tactical approach forming. You want to let them reveal their full plan before countering. Exactly. Miranda turned back to the group. Victor believes I'm neutralized, a broken old woman no longer capable of challenging their scheme. That perception is our greatest advantage. She returned to the table, her natural authority emerging as she outlined her strategy. Elizabeth, prepare the share activation documents, but we'll hold them in reserve. Margaret, continue gathering evidence, particularly regarding these overseas investors James discovered. We need to identify exactly who Victor is planning to sell controlling interest to. And the board meeting? Elizabeth prompted. I'll attend as expected, the subdued, compliant mother supporting her son's vision. Miranda's smile held no warmth. But you, Elizabeth, will attend as my personal counsel. Your presence alone will signal to the more experienced board members that something significant is occurring. Foster will support you, James added. And I've identified 2 other board members who have expressed private concerns about Nathan's leadership. Good. We'll need their votes when the moment comes. Miranda turned to Margaret. Can you prepare a comprehensive financial presentation revealing the full extent of the irregularities? Something clear enough that even non-financial board members will understand the implications? Absolutely, Margaret confirmed, professional confidence replacing her earlier nervousness. I can have it ready by tomorrow. Perfect. Miranda addressed the group collectively. Tonight, James and I will conduct surveillance at the Cardinal Club. We need to identify Victor's external partners before Friday. Once we have that piece, our strategy will be complete. Elizabeth studied Miranda with newfound appreciation. Robert always said you were the strategist between you. Now I understand what he meant. Robert built Sinclair Motors on principles of integrity and quality, Miranda replied. I won't allow Victor's greed or Nathan's weakness to destroy that legacy. As the meeting concluded, each participant departed separately to avoid drawing attention. Miranda was the last to leave, pausing as Elizabeth walked her to the elevator. There's something else, the attorney said quietly. Something Robert asked me to tell you if this day ever came. Miranda waited, a familiar tightness forming in her chest at the mention of her late husband. He said to remind you of Sarajevo, 1982. Elizabeth watched comprehension dawn in Miranda's eyes. He said you'd understand what it meant. Miranda nodded slowly, memories surfacing of a mission long ago, one where she'd faced a similar betrayal and responded with calculated precision that had become legendary within their unit. Thank you, Elizabeth, she said softly. Robert always did know exactly what I needed to hear, even from beyond the grave. As the elevator descended, Miranda's reflection in the polished doors showed a woman transformed, no longer the grieving widow or concerned mother, but a strategist fully in her element, preparing for the decisive engagement in a campaign too long delayed. Nathan had abandoned her in the rain, believing he was delivering a lesson in power. By Friday, he would receive an education of his own, one far more consequential than he could possibly imagine. The Cardinal Club occupied the entirety of a restored Victorian mansion on the city's west side, its membership limited to the upper echelon of business leaders and old money families. Miranda hadn't visited since Robert's memorial service, but the doorman recognized her immediately. Mrs. Sinclair, what an unexpected pleasure, he greeted with genuine warmth. We've missed seeing you here. Thank you, Edward. It's been too long. She offered a conspirator's smile. I'm actually hoping to surprise my son. I believe he's in a meeting here tonight? Edward consulted his reservation system. Yes. Mr. Sinclair has the Wellington room reserved from 7 o'clock. Would you like me to announce you? No, thank you. I'd rather surprise him. Miranda glanced at her watch. 6:30 p.m. Perhaps I'll wait in the library until his group arrives. Of course, Mrs. Sinclair. The club's mahogany-paneled library provided an excellent vantage point overlooking the main entrance. Miranda selected a high-backed chair partially concealed by a decorative screen, positioning herself to observe arrivals without being immediately visible. Her phone vibrated with a text from James. In position at service entrance. Security cameras on loop for East Corridor access to Wellington room. Miranda smiled slightly at the reminder of James's technical skills, capabilities that had served them well in their former careers and now provided crucial advantages in this very different kind of operation. At precisely 6:45, Victor Reed arrived, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that screamed new money attempting to appear established. He checked his watch impatiently, scanning the lobby with the calculating gaze of someone perpetually assessing angles and advantages. Nathan arrived 5 minutes later, his confident stride betrayed by the nervous adjustment of his tie as he approached Victor. Miranda observed their interaction with practiced detachment, the subtle power dynamic evident in how Victor directed Nathan with light touches to his elbow, the younger man's unconscious deference to his supposed advisor. But it was the third arrival that caught Miranda's full attention. Anton Kuznetsov, a Russian businessman with reputed connections to organized crime and money laundering operations, entered the club accompanied by 2 associates. Miranda had never met him personally, but she recognized him immediately from intelligence briefings during her former career. His presence clarified the nature of the overseas investors referenced in Nathan's communications. She sent a quick text to James. Kuznetsov present. Need audio in Wellington room ASAP. The response came seconds later. Already done. Access on secure channel 3. Miranda inserted a discreet earpiece, activating the connection to the surveillance James had established. As the group moved toward the private dining room, she slipped out of the library and made her way to the adjacent sitting room, close enough to maintain audio clarity while remaining undetected. Final terms are agreeable, Kuznetsov was saying, his accent less pronounced than she expected. Once the amendments pass on Friday, we transfer the first payment of $50 million. The remainder follows when control officially changes hands. And the, origin of these funds? Nathan's voice held barely concealed anxiety. Kuznetsov's laugh was cold. Is not your concern, Mr. Sinclair. Your company's established import-export infrastructure is what interests us. The funds are clean by the time they reach you. Mr. Sinclair is simply ensuring all regulatory requirements are satisfied, Victor interjected smoothly. The structure we've created provides complete insulation for all parties. Of course, Kuznetsov agreed. Now, shall we discuss the operational transition? Once we assume controlling interest, certain aspects of your business will require modification. Miranda listened intently as Kuznetsov outlined plans to use Sinclair Motors' legitimate international shipping channels and financial networks for what was clearly a sophisticated money laundering operation. Nathan's periodic attempts to assert conditions were gently but firmly redirected by Victor, who had clearly orchestrated every aspect of the arrangement. And my position going forward? Nathan finally asked, the question Miranda had been waiting for. You remain as CEO for appearances, Kuznetsov replied casually, a figurehead with appropriate compensation. Day-to-day operations will be managed by our team, with Mr. Reed serving as our liaison. The disappointment in Nathan's voice was palpable even through the surveillance audio. That wasn't my understanding. I was told I'd maintain operational control. Plans evolve, Victor said smoothly. This arrangement offers you financial security without the burdens of actual management. Given your recent difficulties with decision-making, isn't that preferable? The implied threat beneath Victor's words was clear. Nathan's gambling debts and financial mismanagement had left him with no negotiating leverage. He was being sidelined in his own company, and there was nothing he could do about it. Your debts will be forgiven, Kuznetsov added, as if offering a generous concession. Consider it a retirement package. Miranda had heard enough. She slipped out of the sitting room and texted James. Continue surveillance, meeting Elizabeth at office to finalize strategy. On her drive to Elizabeth's office, Miranda processed what she'd learned. The situation was worse than they'd anticipated. Not just financial fraud and corporate malfeasance, but potential involvement in international money laundering. Nathan hadn't just compromised his inheritance, he'd entangled Sinclair Motors in a criminal enterprise. Elizabeth was waiting when Miranda arrived, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. It's Kuznetsov, Miranda announced without preamble. Anton Kuznetsov and his organization are the overseas investors. Elizabeth removed her glasses, her expression grave. The same Kuznetsov linked to money laundering operations across Eastern Europe? The very same. They're planning to use Sinclair's international infrastructure to clean money. Nathan is being reduced to a figurehead, though I don't think he fully comprehends that yet. This changes our approach considerably, Elizabeth observed. We're no longer simply dealing with corporate governance issues, but potential criminal activity. Miranda paced the office, piecing together the revised strategy. We need to add another layer to our plan. Beyond protecting the company and removing Victor's influence, we need to ensure Nathan understands the full consequences of his actions. You still want to save him, Elizabeth noted. Not as a question, but as recognition of Miranda's underlying motivation. Save him from Kuznetsov, yes. Save him from criminal prosecution if possible. Miranda's expression hardened, but not from accountability. Nathan needs to face the consequences of his choices, controlled consequences that don't destroy his future entirely. What do you propose? We proceed with the original plan for Friday's board meeting, but with a critical addition. Miranda outlined her revised strategy, Elizabeth nodding with increasing approval as the plan took shape. It's risky, the attorney noted when Miranda finished. The timing will need to be perfect. It will be. Miranda's confidence was absolute. James is continuing surveillance tonight, By morning, we'll have everything we need to finalize preparations. Elizabeth gathered the legal documents they'd prepared earlier. I'll make the necessary adjustments to account for the Kuznetsov connection. The share activation paperwork remains ready for your signature. Hold it until Friday morning, Miranda instructed. I want no possibility of premature discovery. As she prepared to leave, Miranda paused at the door. Elizabeth, I need one more thing. If this goes badly, if for some reason our strategy fails, I need assurance that Nathan won't face the worst possible consequences. The attorney studied her old friend with compassion. You're still protecting him even now. He's made terrible choices, Miranda acknowledged, but he's still Robert's son, still my son. I understand. Elizabeth nodded solemnly. I've prepared contingency measures. If necessary, we can demonstrate that Nathan was manipulated by Victor, unaware of the full criminal implications of Kuznetsov's involvement. Thank you. Miranda straightened, her moment of maternal concern giving way to renewed determination. Now we prepare for Friday. Nathan abandoned me expecting submission. Instead, he'll find that his last mistake was forgetting exactly who his mother is. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Miranda reflected on the irony of the situation. For years, she had hidden her past, playing the role of corporate wife and then grieving widow. Nathan had never known his parents' former lives or the skills they had developed long before he was born. Friday would bring revelations on many levels, not just about Sinclair Motors' future, but about the true nature of the family that had built it. Thursday dawned with a clarity that seemed to mirror Miranda's state of mind. The confusion and hurt that had clouded her thinking since Nathan's betrayal had burned away, leaving only crystalline focus and methodical purpose. James arrived at 7, bringing breakfast and the surveillance recordings from the remainder of the previous night's meeting at the Cardinal Club. They continued for another 2 hours after you left, he reported, setting up the audio files on Robert's laptop. The conversation became more technical. Specific plans for using Sinclair's import-export channels to move money through various jurisdictions. Miranda listened intently as the recording played, noting how Victor dominated the conversation, with Nathan offering only occasional questions that revealed his limited understanding of what he was facilitating. He's completely out of his depth, she observed. Listen to how Kuznetsov and Victor exchange glances when Nathan speaks. They're barely concealing their contempt. Nathan seems most concerned about his continued lifestyle, James noted, less about the company's future or the legality of what they're proposing. The recording captured Nathan's increasingly desperate attempts to secure guarantees about his financial compensation and position, while Kuznetsov and Victor offered vague reassurances that grew less convincing as the evening progressed. They'll discard him the moment the transfer is complete, Miranda said, stopping the playback. He's signing away his birthright for empty promises and temporary financial relief. James nodded grimly. They discussed the board meeting extensively. Victor has arranged for 2 board members to be absent, conveniently those most likely to question the amendments. They believe they have enough votes secured to pass the changes. Which board members are being sidelined? Jenkins and Watkins. Both received urgent calls regarding family emergencies that will prevent their attendance. Miranda smiled thinly. Contact them directly. Explain the situation and arrange secure transportation to get them to the meeting. We need every potential ally present. While James made the calls, Miranda reviewed the financial evidence Margaret had compiled overnight, a devastating collection of documentation showing systematic mismanagement and deliberate fraud. The presentation was masterfully organized with clear explanations that would be understandable even to non-financial board members. By mid-morning, Elizabeth arrived with the final legal documents, including the share activation papers that would establish Miranda's controlling interest. Everything is in order, the attorney confirmed. I've also prepared documentation for the regulatory authorities regarding Kuznetsov's involvement. Once activated, we can move immediately to protect the company from potential criminal exposure. Miranda signed the share activation documents, dating them for Friday morning. These remain with you until 1 hour before the meeting. I don't want any possibility of premature discovery. Understood. Elizabeth secured the papers in her briefcase. What about Nathan? How do you want to handle his involvement in the criminal aspects? It was the question Miranda had been wrestling with through a sleepless night. As a mother, she wanted to protect her son from the worst consequences of his actions. As the guardian of Robert's legacy, She couldn't ignore Nathan's willing participation in schemes that threatened to destroy everything they had built. "We present the evidence of his mismanagement and the fraudulent transactions," she decided finally. "But we frame his involvement with Kuznetsov as manipulation by Victor, Nathan as an unwitting participant rather than an active conspirator. That may be difficult to maintain given the recordings," James observed carefully. "The recordings demonstrate his financial desperation and poor judgment, but also his limited understanding of what he was facilitating," Miranda countered. "We use them to remove him from power, not to send him to prison." Elizabeth nodded. A balanced approach. Consequences without destruction. The remainder of the day unfolded with military precision as Miranda's team finalized their preparations. Margaret delivered the completed financial presentation. Board members Jenkins and Watkins were secretly briefed, and arrangements made for their unexpected appearance, and surveillance continued on Victor's meetings as he solidified what he believed would be his triumph. Late afternoon brought a call from Nathan, the first direct contact since he had abandoned Miranda on the roadside. "Mother," his voice carried forced casualness. "I wanted to confirm you'll be attending tomorrow's board meeting." "Of course, Nathan," she replied, matching his tone while signaling to James to record the call. "As we discussed, I want to support the company's new direction." "Good." His relief was palpable even through the phone. "The amendments we're proposing are somewhat technical, but they're essential for our growth strategy." "I'm sure you know what's best for the company," Miranda said, the subtle irony in her statement lost on her son. "Will your friend Victor be presenting the amendments?" "He'll be there as CFO, but this is my initiative," Nathan insisted, the defensiveness in his voice revealing his need to believe he remained in control. "The partnerships these changes will facilitate represent the future of Sinclair Motors." "I look forward to learning more tomorrow," Miranda said. "Will we have dinner afterward, perhaps to celebrate this new chapter?" The question clearly caught Nathan off guard. Yes, that would be nice, assuming the vote goes as expected." "I'm sure everything will proceed exactly as it should," Miranda replied, allowing a hint of her true meaning to color her words. "I'll see you tomorrow, son." After ending the call, she turned to James. He's nervous. He wants to believe this is still his plan, his company, but doubt is creeping in. "Will that make him more dangerous tomorrow?" "Potentially," Miranda acknowledged, "but also more vulnerable to recognizing the truth when it's presented. Deep down, Nathan knows he's lost control of the situation. Part of him may be relieved when it ends." As evening approached, Miranda visited Robert's grave, a private moment of reflection before the confrontation to come. The granite headstone stood solid and dignified, much like the man it commemorated. "Tomorrow I'll protect what we built," she said quietly to the setting sun. "I'll also try to save our son from himself, though I don't know if that's still possible." The cemetery remained silent, offering no answers, but Miranda felt a sense of peace settle over her. Robert had prepared for this eventuality, trusting her to execute the necessary response when the time came. Tomorrow would demonstrate whether that trust had been well placed. Returning home, she found James completing the final security arrangements for the board meeting. "Everything is in place," he reported. "Elizabeth has confirmed the share activation will be filed first thing tomorrow. Margaret is prepared to present the financial evidence. Jenkins and Watkins will arrive separately, unannounced until the meeting begins. And the authorities regarding Kuznetsov? On standby. Once we have board authorization, they can move immediately to freeze any pending transactions and investigate the money laundering operation." Miranda nodded approval. "Then we're as prepared as we can be. The rest depends on execution." James studied her with the insight of decades of shared experiences. "You're concerned about Nathan's reaction." "Yes," she admitted. "Tomorrow destroys the fiction he's been living in, not just about the company, but about who I am, who his father and I always were." "He may never fully understand," James observed gently. "Some people aren't equipped to reconcile contradictory truths about their parents." "Perhaps not," Miranda agreed. "But he needs to face reality, whatever he ultimately makes of it. The time for protective fictions has passed." She moved to the window, watching darkness settle over the estate grounds that had once echoed with Nathan's childhood laughter. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning years in the making, one that would determine not just the future of Sinclair Motors, but whether anything remained of the family that had created it. "Robert always said crisis reveals character," she said quietly. Tomorrow, we'll discover what Nathan is truly made of, and whether there's anything left worth salvaging. Friday morning arrived, with unseasonable fog shrouding the city, the gray mist reflecting the gravity of the day ahead. Miranda dressed with particular care, selecting a tailored navy suit that had been a favorite of Robert's, professional yet commanding, the kind of outfit that conveyed authority without requiring words. Elizabeth called, James reported as he drove them toward Sinclair headquarters. The share activation documents have been filed and confirmed. You now officially hold controlling interest in the company. Miranda nodded, reviewing her notes one final time. And our board allies? Jenkins arrived at his hotel last night. Watkins is en route from the airport now. Both will enter the building separately, through different access points, approximately 15 minutes before the meeting begins. Victor's location? Already at headquarters with Nathan. They've been there since 7, meeting with selected board members individually, last-minute vote securing, presumably. Miranda gazed out at the fog-shrouded buildings they passed. After today, nothing will be the same for any of us, especially Nathan. Are you having second thoughts? James asked carefully. No, she replied without hesitation, but I take no pleasure in what must be done. Nathan created this situation through his choices, but understanding that doesn't make this any easier. Robert would be proud of how you've handled this, James said quietly. Balancing justice with mercy isn't simple. They arrived at Sinclair headquarters 40 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Miranda chose to enter through the main lobby rather than the executive entrance, a deliberate choice that allowed her to be seen by employees who had known her since the company's founding days. The respect in their greetings, the genuine warmth from longtime staff members, reinforced the legacy she was fighting to protect. Elizabeth was waiting in a small conference room they designated as their staging area, accompanied by Margaret Chen, whose nervous energy manifested in the continuous reorganization of her presentation materials. Everything is prepared, Elizabeth confirmed. The share certificates have been registered with the corporate secretary. Once the meeting begins, the new ownership structure will be officially entered into the record. And the evidence? Miranda asked, turning to Margaret. All documented and organized, the accountant replied, indicating her presentation. Financial trails, fraudulent transactions, unauthorized fund transfers, everything required to demonstrate the systematic mismanagement and deception. Miranda nodded approval. Remember, present the facts clearly but without emotion. The evidence speaks for itself. It doesn't need dramatic emphasis. At 5 minutes before the scheduled meeting time, Miranda received confirmation that both Jenkins and Watkins had arrived and were in position to enter the boardroom when signaled. The element of surprise remained intact. It's time, James said, checking his watch. The other board members are already assembling. Miranda took a moment to center herself, drawing on decades of experience in high-pressure situations. Then, she led her small team toward the boardroom, every step purposeful and measured. The reaction when she entered was precisely what she had anticipated. Nathan, standing at the head of the table with Victor slightly behind his right shoulder, faltered mid-sentence. Several board members looked up with expressions ranging from surprise to relief at her confident entrance, accompanied by Elizabeth Winters, whose reputation was well known to anyone in corporate governance. Mother? Nathan recovered quickly, his tone a careful blend of welcome and caution. And, Ms. Winters, I wasn't aware you would be bringing counsel today. Given the significance of today's proposed amendments, it seemed prudent, Miranda replied calmly, taking a seat halfway down the table rather than at her usual position near the end. A subtle but clear shift in the power dynamic. Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as he assessed this unexpected development. Mrs. Sinclair, while outside counsel is certainly permitted, these amendments have already been thoroughly reviewed by our legal team. I'm sure they have, Miranda smiled pleasantly. Nevertheless, I prefer independent evaluation of such significant changes. Nathan glanced at his watch. We should begin. We have several absent members today, but we have quorum. The boardroom door opened again, admitting Jenkins and Watkins in quick succession, their unexpected appearance visibly unsettling Nathan and Victor. Apologies for the confusion regarding our attendance, Jenkins said smoothly, taking his seat. Fortunately, the emergencies we were notified about proved to be misunderstandings. The meaningful emphasis on emergencies sent a ripple of tension through the room. Victor's composure slipped momentarily as he whispered something urgent to Nathan, whose expression hardened in response. "Now that we're all present," Nathan began with forced confidence, "let's proceed with the agenda. The primary item today is the proposed amendments to our corporate structure, which will enable strategic partnerships essential for our continued growth." "Before we address the amendments," Miranda interjected, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, "there's a matter of corporate governance that must be entered into the record." Nathan frowned. "Any other business should be addressed after the primary agenda items." "This directly impacts those items," Elizabeth stated, opening her briefcase and removing the official documentation. "As of 8:15 this morning, the ownership structure of Sinclair Motors has been updated to reflect the activation of previously dormant Class B shares held in trust since Mr. Robert Sinclair's reorganization of the company 3 years ago." She slid copies of the filing across the table. "These shares, now activated by Mrs. Sinclair as trustee, constitute controlling interest in the company and supersede all other share classes in matters of corporate governance." The boardroom erupted in confused murmurs as board members examined the documents. Victor snatched a copy, his face darkening as he scanned the legal language. "This is preposterous," he snapped, all pretense of professional courtesy evaporating. "These supposed shares were never disclosed in any company filings or financial statements. They were properly registered with the appropriate regulatory authorities," Elizabeth countered smoothly. "Their dormant status exempted them from disclosure requirements until activation. I should know. I drafted the documents myself at Robert Sinclair's request." Nathan stared at Miranda, betrayal and confusion warring in his expression. You've been planning this? A secret takeover of my company?" "Not a takeover, Nathan," Miranda corrected gently. "A safeguard. One your father put in place to protect Sinclair Motors from exactly the situation we now face." She nodded to Margaret, who connected her laptop to the boardroom presentation system. "Before we discuss the proposed amendments, the board should be aware of certain financial irregularities that have occurred under current management." The next 30 minutes unfolded with devastating precision as Margaret methodically presented evidence of the company's mismanagement. Unauthorized transfers, fraudulent valuations, suspicious acquisitions, all documented with irrefutable financial records. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to concern to outright alarm as the pattern of deception became unmistakable. Throughout the presentation, Miranda watched Nathan. His initial defiance gradually gave way to grim recognition as the evidence mounted, while Victor's controlled facade crumbled into barely concealed panic. When Margaret finished, Miranda addressed the stunned silence. "There is more you need to know. The amendments proposed today aren't simply about strategic partnerships. They're designed to facilitate the transfer of controlling interest in Sinclair Motors to Anton Kuznetsov and his organization, entities with documented connections to international money laundering operations." She nodded to James, who activated the audio recordings from the Cardinal Club meeting. Nathan's voice filled the boardroom, followed by Victor's and Kuznetsov's, the damning conversation leaving no room for denial or misinterpretation. As the recording ended, Nathan slumped in his chair, the full consequences of his actions finally registering. Victor, however, was already calculating escape routes, his eyes darting to the exits as he began edging away from the table. "Security is waiting outside, Mr. Reed," James stated calmly, his position blocking the main door. Along with representatives from the Financial Crimes Division, Miranda stood, addressing the board with quiet authority. "Given these revelations, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current CEO and the temporary assumption of executive authority by the board chair until new leadership can be properly established." The motion passed unanimously, Nathan not even attempting to vote against it. Victor was escorted from the room by security, his final glare at Miranda promising retribution that would never materialize. As the meeting adjourned into stunned aftermath, Miranda approached her son, who remained seated, staring at the evidence still displayed on the boardroom screen. "It's over, Nathan," she said quietly. "All of it." He looked up, the arrogance finally stripped away, leaving only the lost expression of a man facing the ruins of his own making. "How long?" he asked hoarsely. "How long have you been preparing for this?" "Your father began preparing the day he recognized the path you were on," Miranda answered truthfully. "I simply finished what he started." The aftermath of the board meeting unfolded with the controlled chaos of a long-planned operation finally executed. Board members huddled in shocked discussion while corporate counsel frantically assessed legal implications. Security escorted Victor to a conference room where financial crimes investigators waited to conduct a formal interview. Through it all, Miranda maintained a calm center, directing necessary actions with the quiet authority that had once characterized her leadership in very different circumstances. Nathan remained in the boardroom, seemingly unable to process the complete collapse of his carefully constructed reality. When the space finally emptied of everyone except Miranda and James, he looked up at his mother with eyes that held more questions than she could possibly answer in one conversation. "Who are you?" he asked finally, his voice barely audible. "You and Dad. Who were you, really?" Miranda considered the question carefully. The time for protective fictions had passed, yet the complete truth remained classified, buried in redacted files and operational reports that would never see daylight. "Before Sinclair Motors, before you were born, your father and I served our country in ways that required certain skills," she began, choosing her words with precision. "Strategic thinking, risk assessment, the ability to identify threats and neutralize them before they materialized." "Military?" Nathan guessed, struggling to reconcile this new information with his understanding of his parents. "Special operations," James supplied from his position near the door. "Your father was my commanding officer for 12 years. Your mother was our strategic operations specialist. Together, they ran some of the most successful counterintelligence operations of their era." Nathan's gaze darted between them, disbelief gradually giving way to dawning comprehension. "That's how you knew about Kuznetsov, how you were able to plan all this." "We recognized the patterns," Miranda acknowledged. "When someone has been trained to identify threats and secure assets, those skills don't disappear with retirement." "And Dad's heart attack? Was that?" "Natural causes," Miranda assured him gently. "Your father had a congenital heart condition he'd managed for years. He knew his time was limited, which is why he created the contingency measures I activated today." Nathan fell silent, absorbing this revelation about the parents he thought he'd known. Miranda allowed him the space to process, recognizing that some adjustments to fundamental truths require time. "What happens now?" he finally asked, the question encompassing far more than immediate next steps. "Legally, several things are already in motion," Miranda explained. "The Financial Crimes Unit is building their case against Victor. The board has voted to remove you as CEO and appointed an interim leadership committee until a permanent replacement is selected. The amendments you proposed have been withdrawn, and the deal with Kuznetsov's organization will not proceed." "And me?" The vulnerability in Nathan's voice momentarily pierced Miranda's carefully maintained composure. Despite everything, he was still her son. The baby she had once cradled, the child whose nightmares she had soothed, the young man who had made Robert so proud before ambition and weakness led him astray. "That depends partly on you," she replied honestly. "There will be consequences, Nathan. The evidence of financial mismanagement and corporate malfeasance can't be ignored. However, we've structured the narrative to emphasize Victor's manipulation and your limited understanding of Kuznetsov's criminal intentions." "You're protecting me," he realized, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. "Even after what I did, even after—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the memory of abandoning his mother on a rainy roadside suddenly shameful beyond articulation. "Not from all consequences," Miranda clarified, "but from complete destruction. Yes, you'll never lead Sinclair Motors again. Your reputation in the business community will require years to rebuild, if it ever can be. But with cooperation and genuine contrition, you can avoid criminal charges." The magnitude of his downfall seemed to hit Nathan all at once. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent, suppressed emotion. Miranda gave him this moment of private reckoning, understanding that sometimes rock bottom must be fully experienced before reconstruction can begin. When he finally looked up, something had shifted in his expression, a hardness broken perhaps, or a humility long absent finding its way back to the surface. "I don't deserve your protection," he said quietly. "Perhaps not," Miranda agreed, her tone gentle but unflinching. "But you have it nonetheless, not because you've earned it, but because of who we are to each other. Family protects family, Nathan, even from their worst impulses. That's something your father understood deeply." James approached the table, placing a folder before Nathan. These documents require your signature. They formalize your resignation as CEO and board member of Sinclair Motors, acknowledge the financial improprieties identified today, and commit you to full cooperation with all resulting investigations. Nathan stared at the papers for a long moment before reaching for a pen. "What will you do?" he asked as he signed each page. "Will you run the company now?" "No." Miranda shook her head. "Sinclair Motors needs fresh leadership, someone with automotive industry experience and impeccable integrity. The board will conduct a proper search while I temporarily guide the transition. And after that, I have other priorities to consider." The hint of a smile touched Miranda's lips. "It seems I'm not quite ready for the quiet retirement I thought I wanted." As Nathan completed the paperwork, Elizabeth entered the boardroom, her expression professionally neutral despite the extraordinary circumstances. "The Financial Crimes Unit has finished their initial interview with Mr. Reed," she reported. "They've taken him into custody based on substantial evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. They've requested a formal statement from Nathan regarding his involvement." "I'll cooperate fully," Nathan said, before Miranda could respond, a small but significant assertion of responsibility. "Whatever they need to know, I'll tell them." Elizabeth nodded approval. "That approach will significantly strengthen our position regarding your limited culpability." She turned to Miranda. "The Interim Leadership Committee is assembling in the executive conference room. They've requested your presence to help stabilize the organization and address immediate concerns." "Of course." Miranda gathered her materials, preparing to navigate the next phase of the day's challenges. She paused before leaving, fixing Nathan with a gaze that carried both compassion and uncompromising expectation. "We'll continue this conversation later. For now, tell the investigators the complete truth, Nathan. No more deceptions, no more evasions." He nodded, something like relief crossing his features, the paradoxical liberation that sometimes comes with having no further options for escape. In the hallway outside, Miranda briefly allowed herself to acknowledge the emotional toll of the morning. James, ever observant, noticed her momentary vulnerability. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I will be," she assured him, straightening her shoulders. "This was necessary but not easy." "Robert would be proud of how you handled it," James offered. "Strength without cruelty, consequences without destruction." "Perhaps," Miranda acknowledged, "though I suspect even Robert couldn't have anticipated how completely our son would lose his way, or how decisively his mother would act to bring him back," James countered. As they walked toward the conference room where the newly appointed leadership committee waited, Miranda reflected on the day's events, not as a victory, but as the essential first step in a rehabilitation that would require months, perhaps years to complete. For Sinclair Motors, for Nathan, and for herself, the company would survive, stronger for having excised the corruption that had threatened its foundations. Nathan would face a reckoning long overdue, with the possibility, however distant, of eventual redemption. And Miranda herself had emerged from the protective shell of retirement, reclaiming not just her authority within the company, but aspects of her true self that had remained dormant since Robert's death. "What happens after the transition?" James asked as they approached the conference room. "Will you return to retirement?" Miranda considered the question with newfound clarity. "No," she decided. "I think it's time for a new chapter, one that honors Robert's legacy while acknowledging that life continues to evolve. Whatever that evolution might bring, she would face it with the same strategic thinking and quiet strength that had guided her through this crisis. Nathan's cruel abandonment on that rainy road had indeed been his last mistake, not just in his scheme to control Sinclair Motors, but in his fundamental misunderstanding of exactly who his mother had always been. 6 months after the boardroom confrontation that had changed everything, Miranda stood at the window of Robert's study, her study now, reclaimed as a working space rather than a shrine. Winter had yielded to spring, the gardens below erupting with new growth that seemed an appropriate metaphor for the transformations underway. Sinclair Motors had not merely survived the crisis, but emerged stronger. The Interim Leadership Committee, under Miranda's guidance, had stabilized operations, transparent disclosures to shareholders and regulators had rebuilt trust, and a new CEO had been selected after an exhaustive search. Catherine Daniels, an industry veteran with impeccable credentials and a management philosophy that aligned with the company's renewed commitment to integrity. The door opened quietly as James entered with the morning's reports. Their working relationship had evolved into a comfortable routine, with James serving officially as Miranda's chief of staff during the transition and unofficially as her most trusted advisor in all matters. "The final asset recovery numbers," he announced, placing a folder on her desk. "The forensic accountants have traced and reclaimed 87% of the funds Victor diverted through his various schemes." "Better than expected," Miranda observed, scanning the figures. "And Victor himself? Sentenced yesterday. 18 years for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and money laundering. No possibility of parole for at least 12. Miranda nodded, satisfaction tempered by awareness of the human cost. Victor had proven to be even more extensively corrupt than they'd initially realized, his schemes extending beyond Sinclair Motors to several other companies he had similarly infiltrated. His cooperation after arrest had been minimal, his arrogance intact even as the evidence mounted against him. And Kuznetsov? Interpol apprehended him in Dubai last week. The evidence from the Sinclair case provided the final pieces they needed for an international warrant. James allowed himself a small smile of professional satisfaction. "Your recordings from the Cardinal Club proved particularly valuable." "Some skills never quite disappear," Miranda acknowledged. "Though I doubt Robert ever imagined my surveillance training would be applied to corporate malfeasance." She moved from the window to her desk, where a different folder waited, this one containing updates on a more personal matter. She opened it carefully, reviewing the contents she already knew by heart. "Nathan's counselor reports continued progress," James noted, observing her attention to the documents. 6 months of therapy, consistently attending the financial recovery program, and maintaining sobriety. The discovery of Nathan's gambling addiction had been one of many painful revelations in the aftermath of the confrontation. What had begun as casual entertainment had escalated into a destructive compulsion, fueled by the pressures of trying to fill his father's role and systematically exploited by Victor. The rehabilitation program addressing both the addiction and the underlying emotional issues was showing promising results, though the journey remained ongoing. "And the community service?" Miranda asked. "Exemplary, according to his supervisor at the Veterans Center. He's been teaching financial literacy and basic automotive maintenance to returning service members." James handed her an additional report. "He's requested permission to expand the program to include job placement assistance within the automotive industry." Miranda read the proposal with careful attention. Nathan's community service had been part of the agreement that had kept him from criminal prosecution. 500 hours working with veterans, many of whom had served alongside Robert in earlier years. What had begun as obligatory penance had apparently evolved into something more meaningful. "Approve the expansion," she decided, "and arrange for appropriate funding through the Sinclair Foundation." The foundation, established with a portion of Miranda's controlling shares, had become her primary focus in recent months. Dedicated to veteran support programs, education initiatives, and community development, it represented a constructive channeling of the family's resources and a permanent legacy that extended beyond the automotive business. "There's one more item," James said, hesitation evident in his tone. "Nathan has requested a meeting. Not here, not at headquarters, but at neutral ground. He specified that he understands if you decline." Miranda considered the request thoughtfully. Their interactions since the confrontation had been limited and carefully structured. Formal statements for the transition process, necessary signatures on legal documents, brief updates on his rehabilitation progress. The distance had been deliberate, allowing both time to process the seismic shifts in their relationship. "Did he indicate the purpose?" she asked. "Only that it's personal, not business-related," James replied, "and that he'd prefer to speak with you alone." Miranda's decision formed with the same clarity that had guided her through the crisis. Arrange it. The boathouse at Lakeside Park. It was always a special place for him as a child. The following afternoon found Miranda at the weathered wooden structure extending into the calm waters of the city's largest park. She arrived early, allowing herself time to absorb the peaceful setting and prepare for whatever Nathan might need to say. He arrived precisely on time, driving a modest sedan rather than the luxury vehicles he had once favored. His appearance had changed subtly, less polished, more genuine somehow, the expensive suits replaced by casual clothes that suggested a man redefining his identity. "Thank you for coming," he began, the formal greeting revealing his uncertainty about where they stood. Of course, Miranda replied, indicating the bench overlooking the water. This place holds good memories. Nathan nodded as they sat, his gaze drawn to the lake where Robert had taught him to sail many summers ago. Dad used to say the water never remembers the last boat that crossed it, that every journey starts with a clean slate. He believed strongly in fresh starts, Miranda agreed, hearing Robert's philosophy in her son's words. It was part of what made him such an effective leader and teacher. They sat in silence for a moment, the gentle lapping of water against the boathouse pilings providing a soothing backdrop. Nathan seemed to be gathering courage for whatever he had come to say. I've been working with my counselor on making amends, he finally began, his voice steady despite the evident difficulty. Not just empty apologies, but genuine accountability and, where possible, restitution. Miranda listened without interrupting, recognizing the structured approach of addiction recovery programs, but also hearing something more personal beneath the framework. What I did to you that day on the road, abandoning you in the rain, trying to teach you a lesson? Nathan shook his head, disgust at his own actions evident. There's no adequate apology for that cruelty. It revealed a darkness in me that I'm still working to understand and overcome. We all have capacities for darkness, Nathan, Miranda said quietly. What matters is recognizing them and choosing differently moving forward. That's what I'm trying to do, he acknowledged. Choose differently. See clearly. Understand the reality I've been avoiding for so long. He turned to face her directly, the defensive barriers that had characterized their interactions for years notably absent. I've spent my life attempting to be the son I thought Dad wanted, ambitious, successful, in control. I never understood what he truly valued until I'd destroyed almost everything he built. Miranda felt an unexpected surge of compassion. Your father was immensely proud of you, Nathan. Not for your achievements or position, but for the moments when your character shone through. Your determination in rebuilding that old Mustang. Your kindness to James's nephew when he was struggling after deployment. Your genuine enthusiasm when explaining engine mechanics to younger employees. Nathan absorbed this with visible emotion. I lost sight of that person somewhere along the way. Perhaps, Miranda agreed gently, but people can be found again if the search is sincere. From his pocket, Nathan withdrew a small, worn object, the Sinclair Motors key fob Robert had given him on his 16th birthday, a cherished possession he had carried throughout his adult life. I haven't felt worthy of carrying this, he confessed, but I keep it as a reminder of what integrity looks like, of the standard I'm working toward, even knowing I may never fully reach it. Miranda recognized the gesture for what it was, not a request for restoration to his former position, but an acknowledgement of the values he had compromised and now sought to reclaim. Your father believed in redemption, she said after a thoughtful pause. Not the easy kind that comes from words alone, but the earned kind that emerges from sustained effort and genuine change. And you? Nathan asked, vulnerability evident in the question. What do you believe is possible between us now? Miranda considered this carefully, honoring the importance of the moment with complete honesty. I believe healing is possible, though not instant. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt deliberately, through consistent actions, transparent communication, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. I'd like to try, Nathan said simply, however long it takes, whatever form it eventually takes. As they sat together watching sunlight play across the water, Miranda reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. The company Robert had built was secure again, under new leadership committed to his founding principles. The son who had nearly destroyed that legacy was engaged in the difficult work of redemption, with promising signs of the person he might yet become. And she herself had emerged from the protective cocoon of widowhood into a new chapter defined by active purpose rather than passive grief. There's something else I've been meaning to tell you, she said, as they prepared to leave. Something about my work with the foundation. The veteran programs? Nathan asked. I've heard they're making a significant impact. Yes, but it's more specific than that. Miranda explained her newest initiative, a rehabilitation center for veterans struggling with gambling addiction and financial distress, issues that disproportionately affected those returning from service. We've secured the funding and location, but we're still developing the program structure and identifying qualified instructors. Understanding dawned in Nathan's expression. You think I might have something to contribute? When you're ready, Miranda confirmed. Your experience, both the destructive choices and the recovery process, provides a perspective that could be valuable to others facing similar struggles. Not now, perhaps not soon, but eventually. Something to work toward. The possibility registered as both challenge and opportunity, a potential path that honored his ongoing recovery while creating meaning from his darkest experiences. As they parted, the awkward formality of their greeting had dissolved into something more authentic, not the easy closeness they had once shared, but a careful, deliberate reconnection based on clearer understanding of who they both truly were. Miranda watched Nathan drive away, recognizing that their relationship, like Sinclair Motors itself, would never return to what it had been before. But perhaps what emerged from the ruins of the old structure might eventually prove stronger, more authentic, and more enduring than what had existed before. That evening, in Robert's study, Miranda opened the hidden compartment in his desk that had contained the contingency plans and emergency provisions. It now held something different, a journal where she had begun recording her reflections on this unexpected chapter of her life, preserving the wisdom hard-won through crisis for whoever might need it in the future. On the last blank page, she wrote, "Nathan abandoned me in the rain, believing he was teaching me about power. Instead, his cruelty became his last mistake, the catalyst that forced me to reclaim not just control of Sinclair Motors, but aspects of myself I had set aside for too long." Sometimes our greatest challenges arrive disguised as cruel moments that initially appear to diminish us. The test lies not in avoiding such moments, but in how we rise to meet them, with strength tempered by wisdom, justice balanced with mercy, and the courage to protect what matters without surrendering to bitterness in the process. She closed the journal, returning it to its secure place. Outside her window, the gardens Robert had designed continued their cycle of renewal, each season bringing its own beauty, its own purpose, its own opportunity for growth. Like those gardens, life continued to evolve in patterns both expected and surprising, offering fresh possibilities for those prepared to recognize and embrace them. The rain had long since passed. What remained was the clarity that follows the storm, and the promise of new growth in ground made fertile by hardship.